On the morning of May 5th in the year 2000, hundreds of thousands of people around the world received an email. And when they opened it, they immediately wished they hadn't. It turned out to be a virus. It was a worm, actually. And this virus spread across Asia, Europe, and the United States, clogging web servers, overwriting personal files, causing IT managers everywhere to shut down email systems. It hit every major business sector from Fortune 500 companies to the Department of Defense and the CIA. Worldwide, it affected over 45 million computers and caused an estimated $8 billion in damage. And what was the secret behind its unprecedented spread? 3 simple words in the subject line. How many of you remember that famous computer virus? And do you remember what those 3 simple words were in that subject line? You got it. I love you. Why do so many people fall for this virus? I think it's simple. Because just about everybody everywhere wants more than anything else for someone to say to them, I love you. 3 simple words. I love you. 3 words that count most in our relationships. It's the 3 words that can change everything. And yet they are the 3 words that some of us have never heard from the most important people in our lives. And others have never said them to the people that we say mean so much to us. Today's message may be difficult for some of us to hear, but we believe it has the power to transform your life and your relationships. We're currently in a series called Relatively Speaking. And throughout it, we've been talking about words or phrases that can bring new life into our most significant relationships. Today's phrase is one of, if not the most important that we can say. I love you. You know, each week we've journeyed through the book of Proverbs in order to lean into the relational wisdom that's recorded there. Proverbs is full of practical insights into daily life. And the majority of the book is credited to be written by King Solomon, who many say is the wisest person to have ever lived. In the book of Proverbs, we're encouraged in this way. It says, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. You know, when it comes to the most important relationships in our lives, this proverb challenges us to ensure that love never leaves us. Love must be the defining characteristic of that relationship. And there are 2 interesting metaphors used to describe love in this proverb. It says that we're to bind love around our neck. And it says we're also to write love on our heart. What I see in these 2 metaphors is both an external dimension as well as an internal dimension to love. Let's start with the internal. The proverb says love should be written on the tablet of our heart. Today we can simply, type something up. We can save it on a hard drive. It's pretty easily preserved. But in Solomon's day, recording vital information wasn't nearly as easy. If you wanted to record something important, you had to engrave it, many times on a stone tablet. This engraving would signify permanency as anything engraved in stone was intended to last forever. This proverb is telling us to ensure that love is a permanent engraving in our lives. It is not just a feeling that we have or a memory we share. Love is to become an essential part of our character. Now, my assumption today is that this is true with our most important relationships. We truly love the people we value most in the depth of our hearts. The internal piece is often in place. But notice that the proverb also talks about the external expression. It says to bind them around your neck. It's a metaphor that speaks to this outward and visible expression of this inward love. Like a necklace that's hanging on our chest, this love is something that should be clearly seen. Love is to be seen through our actions, but also must be vocalized and expressed with words. There are times that we may feel love in our hearts for someone, but we stop short of expressing that externally through our words to them consistently. Never underestimate the power of sharing these 3 words. I love you. They can change everything. But some of us know I love you isn't always the easiest phrase to say. Sometimes it feels quite awkward. It reminds me of a scene from one of my favorite Christmas movies. Buddy the Elf, he meets his dad for the very first time. And when mistaken for a singing telegram, he shares his simple heart-through song, ending with those 3 magic words and kind of a big crescendo. He says, I love you, I love you, I love you. Buddy the Elf is my hero. I really look up to him. He's so lovably awkward. Now, I'm not saying you're awkward, but some of you are able to speak the words I love you with ease and complete genuineness, kind of like Buddy the Elf. But for others, it's a struggle. Sometimes even in the relationship that we value most with the people that we love deeply, we have a hard time saying those words. Why is that? If you struggle to say the words I love you out loud, have you ever stopped to consider why? Maybe we don't say I love you because it's risky. We've said it before and we felt let down or maybe even rejected. Or it's awkward. We're just not used to it. We didn't grow up hearing it or saying it. It kind of feels foreign, or maybe we don't say it because it feels cheap. Talk is cheap, we think to ourselves. Perhaps we've grown a little cynical. Or maybe we're hurt. Withholding these words is our passive-aggressive way of punishing the other person for what they've done to us. And maybe we don't say I love you simply because we've forgotten. Perhaps we're taking the people that we love for granted. But these three words are so powerful, they need to be spoken. And if we truly comprehend the wisdom behind this binding them around your neck, we might decide it's worth the risk. It's worth the awkwardness. It's worth setting aside the cynicism. It's worth letting go of the hurt. It's worth remembering to say, I love you. One of the most predominant characters throughout the story of Jesus, and it really is recorded about this power of this phrase, I love you. Maybe you remember with Peter, St. Peter, the Apostle Peter. He was one of the original followers of Jesus and was known for being kind of outspoken, very bold, sometimes brash in his relationship with Jesus. There are moments that he got it right and he seemed just miles ahead of everyone else in his understanding of who Jesus was and what Jesus was doing in the world. But there were other times when Peter very awkwardly put his foot in his mouth. It was the night before Jesus was crucified. He shared a meal with Peter and the other disciples. It was the meal that Jesus said that Peter would bail on him when things began to heat up. And Peter responds, not a chance. Everybody else may buckle under the pressure, but not me. Jesus, you can count on me. It sounds like a pretty impressive declaration of love and loyalty, doesn't it? But when the chips were down and Jesus was arrested, Peter denies even knowing him. We take a look at it in the book of John, chapter 18. Aren't you one of Jesus' disciples, a servant girl asks. I'm not, Peter declares. Are you one of his followers, a group of men question. I'm not, Peter responds. Wait, didn't I see you with him earlier tonight, a servant of the high priest presses? I don't even know the man, Peter defends. 3 times, Peter had the opportunity to declare his love and loyalty to the greatest friend that he had ever known. And 3 times he turns his back on Jesus. That was Peter before the death and resurrection of Jesus. But the important part of the story for our conversation is what happens after the resurrection. Just days after Peter's colossal failure, he comes face to face with this friend that he had swore that he'd never abandon. And in their first real conversation since Peter denied him, Jesus asks a very simple question. What question do you think that Jesus asked him? If Peter had wronged you and denied knowing you 3 separate times, what question would you ask him? I think I would be inclined to ask Peter, how could you have done this to me? What were you thinking? Are you even sorry, man? All of them would have been pretty appropriate questions if you asked me. And then I'd probably shake my head, I'd stare at the ground, kind of gritting my teeth, waiting anxiously for an apology. But what question did Jesus ask him? Take a look. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me? Out of all the questions that Jesus could have asked Peter, he asks, do you love me? Why is that? I think it's because Jesus genuinely loved Peter. Would you ever ask the question of someone that you didn't love? Why would you care if someone loved you or not unless you first loved them? This is the question that I'd only ask if I truly loved someone. So when Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? In effect, he's communicating, Peter, I do love you. Do you also love me? Implied in the very question is this declaration of Jesus' love for him. Do you love me? It was the question that Peter most needed to hear. And what Peter said back to Jesus, take a look at this. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you, were the words that Peter most needed to say. Did Jesus know the answer to his own question? Probably. But it was important for Peter to say those words out loud. Jesus asks the same question to Peter 3 different times, and 3 times Peter affirms his love for Jesus. I don't think Jesus asked 3 times because he didn't believe Peter's response or that he didn't hear him the first couple times. I don't think his intention was to hurt Peter by pushing the issue over and over again. I think that Jesus gave Peter the opportunity to say, I love you 3 times as a second chance. The 3 I love yous replaced the 3 denials as a defining marker of their friendship. This was a moment of restoration for Peter. This was the moment that his relationship with Jesus was healed. This was the moment that he remembered that he mattered. This was the moment that his failure was forgotten. This was the moment that his purpose in life was renewed. Never underestimate the power of those 3 words, I love you. As you think about the people that matter most in your life, your spouse, your closest friends, your kids, your parents, I would contend it's not enough to simply feel the words, I love you internally. Love must also be expressed very intentionally through our words, because they have the power to restore, heal, ascribe value, to breathe new life into the relationship. So how can we be more intentional with these life-giving words? Let me suggest 3 I love you challenges that we can truly embrace today. Here's the first. Make it regular. Say that with me. Make it regular. Say it in the morning, say it in the evening, say it at bedtime, say it in texts, say it in emails. Let's make I love you something that we regularly say. I began my time here at Community on staff on our student ministry team years and years ago. If you know much about our student ministry, you know that from time to time we get away with students for weekend retreats at places like the Wisconsin Dells. These weekends proved to be life-changing for so many students. And at a retreat a few years ago, I was leading a small group of high school boys. This group of guys, took the conversation to a great level of depth that you don't always see with high school students, especially guys. It's kind of one of those moments that I knew was going to be a very memorable moment for every single person there. And as the conversation was wrapping up, we took a moment to pray over each one of the students. Then I would just give the guy a hug and I would just say, I love you, man. Of course, you have to add the man part so it didn't feel too soft. Now, when I got to one particular student, I hugged him and I told the student that I loved him. And the student immediately burst into tears. At first, I thought I'd done something wrong or that I had stepped on some unforeseen relational landmine. But when the student finally regained his composure, he said, Shawn, those are words that I've never heard said from my real dad, but only from you. Thank you for loving me. God forbid any person you and I love should ever have to say, those are words that I've never heard. This past Valentine's Day, the CNN managing editor, Kat Kinsman, wrote an article about her experiences of saying, I love you. She said actually saying the phrase came quite easy for her, and she attributed it to how she was raised. I thought that part of what she said was quite profound. She says this, she says, raised by people with seemingly endless stocks of both language and affection, I love you was said with casualness, oftenness, and ease of good morning, good night, and please pass the butter. It was so genuine that each and every time that it was said. I was taught that this sentiment earned interest, compounding into a surplus to dip into when we were apart from each other. I knew I was loved because I was lucky enough to have been told. I learned to share the wealth. What a great, great moment. She says, I knew that I was loved because I was lucky enough to have been told. Say it in the morning, say it in the evening, say it at bedtime, say it in text, say it in emails. Let's make I love you something that we say regularly. A second way we can be intentional about saying I love you is to make it unconditional. Say that with me. Make it unconditional. How many of you ever played on a sports team as a kid? I mean, a lot of us have had that experience at one time or another. Anyone have a kind of a crazy parent who is always overexcited and screaming at the top of their lungs? Or maybe you are that parent now. So many times when the game's over and the family piles back into the car to drive home, the conversation turns to a predictable direction. With the very best intentions, parents often become another coach. They praise the good plays in their child. They also offer helpful advice or avoiding future mistakes. It's a very common conversation. But what the research shows is kids don't really want another coach. Through an informal survey taken over 3 decades, longtime coaches Bruce Brown and Robert Miller asked hundreds and hundreds of college athletes, what is your worst memory from playing youth and in high school sports? The overwhelming response was the ride home from games with my parents. These same college students were asked what their parents said and that made them feel great or amplified their joy after the games. The overwhelming response to that question was, I love to watch you play. Think about that for a moment. I love to watch you play. I don't love you for your victories. I don't get frustrated with your defeats. I just love to watch you play. Every person needs to hear those words in one form or another from the most important people in their lives. Conditional love says, I love you when you play better or try harder. It says, I'd love you if you would just change. Whereas unconditional love says, I love you no matter what. The most important people in our lives need to hear this unconditional expression of love. Their value cannot be overestimated. Make it regular, make it unconditional, and finally, we need to become intentional about saying, I love you, and we need to make it more specific. Just make it specific. Think about one of your most treasured relationships, someone you love deeply. And then let me ask you how you would complete this sentence. I love you because blank. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute. Didn't you just say make it unconditional? Yes, you're right. So let me clarify. We're not putting conditions on unconditional love. No, instead the challenge is to look for the things that you love about the person, which are inherent to their very nature, and make sure you tell them those specific things. For instance, if I were saying this to my wife, I would say, babe, I love you because of the way you listen intently when I'm sharing something that's so important to me. If I were saying this to a friend or a coworker, I might say, John, my brother, I love you because of your cheerful disposition, because of your resolve to see the best in every situation. If I were saying it to my dad, I might say something like, Dad, I love you because of the way that you've loved Mom, that you modeled to me what a great husband ought to be. When you tell people specifically why you love them, it affirms their beauty. It reminds them of their value. It gives them confidence to be fully the person who God created them to be. Every person needs to hear the words, I love you. And you and I have the power to speak these words of transformation to our relationships with the people that we hold most dear.